So after they dropped him, that freed T.I. to be a little bit more true to himself. So he created the mixtape, or he created mixtapes. He started posting up in front of nightclubs and giving them straight to his people. And his mixtapes was causing more steam, generating more steam than his LP. So then the record company came back to him and said, you know what, we changed our mind. Come on back. And he said, my price went up. It's the same way with our scholarship. I have a lot of mixtapes out there. I have some bangers, and a lot of my mixtapes have done a lot better than these dry peer-reviewed publications that only get read by people in the ivory tower. When I wrote my book, No BS, BS for Bad Stats, subtitle is Black People Need People Who Believe in Black People Enough Not to Believe Every Bad Thing They Hear About Black People. And yes, it all fits on the cover. I started that book with soul food didn't come from emulating white cooks. Jazz, rock and roll, and hip hop didn't come from emulating white musicians. And good black research won't come from emulating white scholars. I cook my research in a rusty pot with lots of spice and serve it ostentatiously on 2 turntables and a mixer. You can acquire a taste for my tone and let it offend your useless sensibilities. I'm going to be steadfast with my hustle until they start emulating me. Thank you.
Please give another round of applause to Dr. Ivory Toldson. Up next, we have Nicole Lynn Lewis, social entrepreneur and founder of the nonprofit Generation Hope. Nicole will highlight the urgency to lift the next generation of students while we engage those already enrolled. Welcome to the stage, Nicole.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here and have some amazing torch talks to follow. I'm going to be talking to you today about parenting college students, and I want to start off with my own now I've gone too far. Okay, so let me go back. All right, there we go. As you can see, I'm really strong in technology. So this is me in college back in 2003, in the early 2000s. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, when I was in college, I had just graduated from high school with honors, and I started at the College of William & Mary in Virginia, which is a PWI, and it's one of the oldest colleges in the country. So when we think about the early colonial colleges that baked in the DNA of the higher ed system that we know today, William & Mary is right up there with many of the others that you have heard of. In fact, William & Mary in its early days generated its revenue in part from a tobacco plantation. And if you were a student going there, you could bring an enslaved person with you to help you run errands, to support you on campus, all of those things. So this is where I ended up in my college career. Of course, at the time that I was at William & Mary, I didn't know any of that. I was an English major. I love to read. Okay, give it to me. I love to read. I love to write. I love to analyze literature. I fell in love with so many amazing authors, Chaucer, but also Ntozake Shange and Alice Walker, and just incredible authors. I enjoyed hanging out with my girlfriends. I would be in the dorm and chatting with girlfriends in the wee hours of the morning. I also love Mary J. Blige, Biggie Smalls, and Little Kim, all sorts of songs that I don't want to admit to my children that I actually listen to, but they were turned up in my car for sure. So that was me in college. I should mention, I was also student teaching. So I was getting my certification to be an English teacher for middle and high school. So I was student teaching and I was working on an honors thesis, a creative writing honors thesis. This was also me in college. So I was a teen mom. I got pregnant my senior year of high school. And I had just been accepted into a bunch of different colleges when I found out that I was pregnant. When I found out that I had been accepted to William & Mary, I was 8 months pregnant with this little girl right here. I was living day to day in a Motel 6. I was hungry most days. And I remember the day that I got the call that I had been accepted into the school, I just dropped the phone. I was just so overwhelmed by this possibility of me actually going to college as a teen mom, something that didn't happen in my network, didn't happen in my neighborhood, my school, people that I knew who had found themselves in that situation. When I started at William & Mary, I always tell people that I looked down at my feet and I thought, these feet don't belong here. Here I was, a young black mother who was at this predominantly white school, very few students who looked like me, and even fewer students who were mothering a child while putting themselves through that school. I didn't know where my book money was coming from. I didn't know where my tuition money was coming from. Everything was very intimidating. I was very, very intimidated by whether or not I could actually make it to the graduation stage. Every day was 24 hours of survival. I have some amazing memories of being in college, but I also have one vivid memory that I'll never forget. I went to the grocery store because I didn't have a meal plan, couldn't afford a meal plan. Went to the grocery store and I had my daughter in the cart and I just gathered up maybe $20 worth of groceries, put them in the cart, and got to the register. There were several people behind me. And just, the cashier told me what our total was, about $20, like I said, and my debit card was declined. And I had to push my daughter into the parking lot in that cart, and I didn't know where we were going to eat that night or what we were going to eat that night. And that's a vivid memory that was indicative of so many days for me as a mother in college. Basic needs were very difficult to come by. Food, housing, childcare, all of those things. It was a daily exercise in survival and connecting the dots. Now, I was an anomaly at William & Mary, not only because I was a black student and because I was a mother, but also because I actually did graduate. So 4 years after I first stepped foot on campus, I walked across the graduation stage hand in hand with Narissa, my daughter, and I graduated with high honors. Now, thank you very much. Now, that does make me an anomaly because fewer than 2% of teen mothers earn a college degree before age 30. The vast majority, 98%, do not earn a post-secondary credential before they turn 30. And we don't have the data on teen fathers because there's not enough data on teen fathers. But we know they're similarly struggling to complete high school, less than 50% complete high school, and then to complete their college credentials. So I was an anomaly at William & Mary, but I want you to know that being a student parent is not an anomaly today. Likely there are people sitting to your right or left, or even people working in this hotel today who have some connection to teen pregnancy, parenting in college, parenting in high school. It's a significant population, but it's something we don't talk about, right? It's something we don't talk about and really acknowledge. If we just look at the student parent population, nearly 5 million undergraduate students across this country are parenting. That's about 1 in 5 college students across the country. Now, when I tell most higher ed professionals those statistics, their jaws drop on the floor because this is an invisible population. It also doesn't include the millions of students who would likely enroll in college, who are parenting and would enroll in college if they felt that colleges were a place where they could thrive and be supported and validated and welcomed. Now, we also know some other stats about this population. They're more likely to be students of color. When we look at the demographic breakdown, almost half of all black female undergraduates across this country are parenting while in college. Almost half. For Black single fathers in college, they have the highest stopout rates of any other student group. 70% of Black single fathers stop out of college because they don't have the resources and the support to make it to the graduation stage. Now, we also know that this population, while it's very under-resourced, has incredible assets to bring to our college communities. Student parents have higher GPAs on average than those students without children. Now, one of the things that I know for sure in my own experience is that this little girl motivated me every single day. It was not an option to fail because I knew that she was counting on me to be successful. There was no plan B. And we see that in all the student parents that we work with, all the young parents that we work with, that motivation and that drive often comes from their children. So these are some statistics about student parents. Let's talk about the work that we do at Generation Hope, my organization. I started Generation Hope in 2010. I graduated in 2003. I started in 2010, so about 7 years after I graduated from college. You know, I had this experience of overcoming the odds and being able to say, hey, I'm a part of that 2%. But it was so rare, and I felt that that was completely unacceptable for so many young parents to not be able to get their college degrees, to not be able to have access to resources and supports that they deserve to actually complete. And so I started Generation Hope because I looked across the landscape, and in the DC area where we're based, there were no organizations working on this issue. And across the country, very few people were connecting teen parents in college. So we have been working boots on the ground for the past 12 years with teen moms and teen dads in the DC area. We've helped more than 200 of them in their pursuit of a college degree. We've celebrated over 100 degrees. We've given out over $1 million in college tuition support. We've wrapped services around them because it's not just the money. It's the network, it's the village, it's someone who believes in you, it's an environment that welcomes you and celebrates you. So we have mental health supports, we have a whole career readiness program. We bring them together to create that community. We have a robust mentoring program. All of these things come together to create a support system for these students. So we've seen that this works, this holistic model that doesn't just support the scholars, we call our student scholars, but also their children. We have a whole early childhood program that simultaneously helps their children get ready for kindergarten. And so we've seen that this holistic wraparound model really does move the needle. I mentioned the stat about teen parents, how few of them go on to get a credential before age 30. At Generation Hope, our graduation rate is higher than the national average for all college students, whether they're parenting or not. So it really does prove that this holistic support makes a difference. So we've been doing this work, and one of the things about 3 or 4 years ago we started to talk about is, you know, we're seeing these tremendous results in helping this population that is largely unseen in higher ed experience success. We also have seen that we've worked with over 20 colleges in our direct service work, and outside of the DC region we're working with various institutions, and what we saw across higher ed were these significant sinkholes, these systemic sinkholes in the higher education system when it comes to serving this population. And I wish I could tell you that it was, you know, something just relegated to PWIs or just relegated to community colleges, but that's not the case. We see that these sinkholes, these gaps in services exist at every type of institution across the higher ed field, including HBCUs. And we work with students, we support students at HBCUs. And so we said, you know, at the same time, we feel like we can help the field really rethink the way that they serve this population. So we started and launched our national work. And that national work includes kind of a three-pronged approach. The first approach is we partner with colleges and universities across the country to help them transform their campuses to be family-friendly campuses. And these transformations, while they sound like they benefit a niche group, they benefit all students. When we have a more inclusive, supportive campus community, it is going to be supportive of all students, right? So that's the first thing that we do. The second thing that we do is we work with policymakers, both at the local level and the federal level, to talk about what are the pieces of legislation that need to be championed to remove systemic hurdles for this population. We're looking at higher ed affordability. We're looking at true pathways to economic mobility. We're looking at childcare, universal pre-K, affordable childcare programs. All of that is really important. And then the third thing that we do is we release research and reports. And one thing that I did last year is I released my book. My book is called Pregnant Girl, and it's a memoir, and it really details my own story of overcoming the odds as a young mother in college. But it's also a call to action. It invites people to join us in this work. And why is this important? I can't tell you how many times I go out and I talk to people in audiences about what we do at Generation Hope, and someone comes up to me, at least one person, but often many people, and say, this was my story. This was my story, or this was my mother's story, or my cousin's story, or my friend's story. Or I have people who come up to me and say, my sister just found out that she's pregnant. I want to help her continue her education. Can you help me? Can you help me find a college that's really going to help her? These are the things that we're not talking about, right? It's a pervasive issue. It's connected to so many things that we care about, but we aren't talking about it. So I want to talk to you today about what can colleges do. And so there are some 4 things that I'm going to cover with you that are just ways to kind of get this work started. The first thing I talk to colleges and universities about, I have a question, and I say, when you think of student parents, do you consider them an asset or a liability? And if we're being honest, most higher ed professionals aren't considering student parents. That's the first thing. They're not thinking about this population. It's been an invisible population in higher ed. And so many of us working in this field just aren't considering the needs of this population when we're making decisions and creating policies on our campuses. For those that do consider this population, if we're being honest, most likely they're looking at them as a liability. And I want us, as a first thing, to shift that perspective, to begin to really see this population as deserving of supports, as belonging on our campuses and at our institutions, as worthy, and as assets to who we are and who we want to be as institutions. That's the first thing that I want us to do. The second thing is, once you've recognized that, it's important to recognize that there are student parents at your institution. I have sat down across from college administrators, college leaders, who will tell us, I don't have that problem here. And first of all, it's not a problem. Second of all, I guarantee you, you have these students in your classrooms, walking across your campus every single day. They are at your institution, but they aren't on your radar and they are not completing. So recognizing that you do have student parents. Now the third thing is, how many student parents do you have and who are they? So we know nationally the numbers are about 5 million, but from an institutional standpoint, most colleges and universities are not tracking the parenting status of their students. They're not collecting that data. When I first started Generation Hope, that's one of the first things I said. I'm going to go all around the DC area. I'm going to talk to different colleges and universities. I'm going to ask them, can you tell me how many students you have who are parenting? And after the first few conversations, I realized no one's tracking this data. No one has this data, which for me felt like important data to know, right? You want to know if your students are experiencing food insecurity? Wouldn't it be important to know if they have 2 and 3 mouths to feed? That's important. So institutions have to start collecting this data. Otherwise, you're flying blind when it comes to a key population at your institution. And there are different ways to collect that data that can protect FERPA, that can make sure that you're not being invasive, that you're collecting it on a regular basis, because parenting status can change overnight. Lots of different ways to collect this in a responsible way. The third thing is looking at your policies. There are so many policies at institutions that marginalize this population. A great example is requiring all freshmen to live on campus. Well, if I'm a mom and I have a baby, That's going to be really difficult unless you're offering family housing, which we know only 8% of colleges and universities offer family housing across the country. Another example is no kids on campus. So many institutions have this policy. Again, it communicates to me as a parenting student that I don't belong here. I'm not welcome here. My lived experience is not validated here. So really looking at your policies through a student-parent lens. The last thing is, and this is something we believe so strongly at Generation Hope, is include student parents in the decision-making conversations that you're having as an institution. They are not likely to be able to come to every event or to be able to participate in the traditional ways that you might be engaging students because they have children. They have caregiving responsibilities. So being creative in how do you reach out to these students? How do you bring them into those decision-making conversations so they can help you come up with those authentic solutions is really important. This all leads to a sense of belonging. And I want to go back to that because that's what I found myself feeling my first day at William & Mary. And whether a student belongs has huge predictions, feels that they belong, has huge predictions for whether or not they're going to complete. And we have to create these institutions where student parents feel that they belong. This is a quote from Pregnant Girl. I want to read it to you and leave you with this. I never reached the day when I faced the big things and didn't question myself. I will come to realize that if I reach that point, I'm probably not doing anything big. I'll always approach the microphone with butterflies in my stomach and ask for people's input on a far-reaching decision. But one thing I will never do again is question whether I belong at the table. My invitation to you is let's create institutions where all students, including student parents, don't question whether they belong at the table. Thank you.
Please give another round of applause to Nicole Lynn Lewis.